I'm Andrew Catchpole, for those who don't know me, editor of Harpers Wine and Spirit, and I'd also like to thank California Wines today, California Wine Institute, for making it possible, making this happen. We're obviously all aware, and the reasons you're here, that sustainability is an incredibly important topic to continue a conversation about at this precise time, and looking forward, not least for the health of the planet generally, very pressing matters. What we've done today, which I think is really quite interesting, we've heard Steve talk earlier, and very much from the fascinating talk, very much from the viticultural side of it, rooted in what's actually going on the ground with the earth in the vineyards, with the vines. I'd like to then, with the panel, who I'll allow to introduce themselves in a moment, to kind of connect the dots through to the consumer and look at what aspects of sustainability perhaps resonate with consumers, what buttons we can press, what cues we can use to kind of draw out, also to help then support all the way back to the farmer, because if the consumer isn't buying into sustainable practice, which may actually cost a little more effort and money, then the whole circle doesn't become as virtuous as it could. In fact, it could break down or be difficult.
My name is Sergio Verillo. I am the co-founder and winemaker for Black Book Winery based in Battersea.
My name is Bronwen Percival, and I'm the buying and technical manager for Neal's Yard Dairy, and I work with cheese.
My name is Janina Grabs, and I'm an academic focused on the political economy of sustainable food systems, and so I have worked a lot on certification in coffee and the way that it impacts farmers on the ground.
In many ways, even these small farmers have been a party to intensifying their systems, because economically that was the right thing to do. And so I think really the next few years are going to be about really getting ahead of that conversation and addressing that not all pastoral farming is created equal from a sustainability perspective, from an environmental sustainability perspective, and how do we communicate that to our customers?
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's effectively what you've touched on is what we're battling with in the UK wine industry. You know, we're such a small group of people, if you think globally where we're at, that it's the costings and the financial impact of implementing these sort of processes are significant when you're thinking at such a small scale. I'm sure you've experienced it with your dairy farmers. So it's understanding how to implement all these different facets of sustainability, what is going to be looked at and beneficial for the long term versus the financial viability of the business at hand. So, yeah.
Steve, what was it, necessity that has driven California to such a position of sort of leadership in terms of sustainability?
I'm trying to think of how it came about. Is really, I almost want to say cultural. And it's just part of part of being a Californian, I guess, is thinking about the environment. And it's that we live out. You know, there's a lot of outdoors. There's a lot of hiking. You think about John Muir. The Sierra Club started in California. You know, a lot of the organic farming and it's been one of the nexuses of organic farming, farm to table. There's a lot of these things have risen up in California, and it's sort of, you know, not that everyone thinks the same way, but for sure that it's a part of the California culture that then people in California care and start, you know, these seeds just keep being planted and planted and planted, and we just and it's really kind of, I think it's a second nature thing.
Certainly becoming more and more on the forefront. I think we're a ways away. We are currently, so initially, there's no sustainability guides up until 2010, which Wine Skills, who is sort of the guiding light to sort of winemakers and viticulturists based here in the UK, formed with DEFRA to create the first sustainability guide as what you guys had at Lodi back in the 90s. And so that was just implemented, you know, 8 years ago. And then due to a lack of EU funding, it's been dropped. And I'm part of the current board that's trying to bring that more to the forefront. So ultimately, to answer your question, we're a long ways away. You know, I think the correlation between sustainability and the economics, people think it costs a lot more to implement these checks and balances than what it actually will do.
From my experience, I think it's more of a case of the dairy industry learning from the wine industry. In a way, even the steps that you describe, which have been so foundering in many ways, are really leagues ahead of where I think we are in the dairy industry right now. And part of that, I think, is a necessary side effect of the fact that even the people who are producing these cheeses, many of them are primarily commodity producers, and they may make cheese with a small percentage of their milk, but most of it's being sold at the spot rate on the market for only pence above the production cost. And under those circumstances, as we said, just from an existential point of view, environmental factors are really kind of the last thing to be serviced, and understandably so. So looking at the wine industry and the way in which making a value-added product that people actively want to buy and which is freed itself in many ways from the commodity market is a really interesting template that we can, I hope, start to introduce so that we can find the real price for these products and feed that money back into more environmental service sides of things.
I think when you talk about sustainability, organic farming, and sort of ultimate provenance of a product, which hopefully equates to quality, we're capturing, the 10% of the population. So how do we get the 90% on board with that? How do we sort of bring them to the forefront of understanding that what we are doing and how we're doing it equates to something that is quite better, and then beyond that is trying to then get them to pay more money for it.
I mean, one aspect of that, I think, is that in general, and I speak as a German, where food prices have been radically low for decades, there needs to be a wider conversation about what food costs in the broader sense of the term. And so environmental economists talk of externalities, that is, costs that are external to the price that you pay, but that will incur in the long run in terms of water scarcity, in terms of contributions to climate change, in terms of biodiversity loss, and ways in which those things could be costed in. That's all of these conversations about carbon markets, for instance. It becomes quite technical, but having this broader idea that the fact that food is currently so cheap and we're paying the prices that we're paying is because we're not thinking of certain aspects that will become relevant, not even just in future generations, but for current generations. And I see a lot of promise in those Fridays for Future movement, where we are now seeing a generational shift towards thinking of those things in a more systemic way.
I mean, for sure, it's considered to be something of the land at the higher end, and I think a lot of commodity wine is maybe not so much, but there's also sometimes I think that it's not as much a part of the conversation of wine that was grown by a farmer. Mm-hmm. It sort of somehow springs up from the land and gets into the barrel, and is this sort of different special thing, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even we think like grower champagne, farmer fizz, right? So, well, where's all the other champagne coming from? That's one of the things that I think is important, and that when we talk about our wine, we talk a lot about the growing practices, the viticulture. Our logo is a pruning shears, or secateurs, to show that the craftsmanship and the tending of this plant. And it's amazing, like, how few people know what that picture of the secateurs is. They're like, is that a pliers or something? And it's like, because people are very disconnected in that regard.
From the land.
From the land, and so, but it's interesting because like I feel like wine has a lot to offer to other cheese and coffee and a lot of other things in terms of the idea of connoisseurship and quality and place and artisanalism, but like I know that coffee has a lot to teach us about how to communicate sustainable practices, because it's become part of good coffee was it grown sustainably. I mean, it's just sort of almost, like at least in California, that's a given, that if it's going to be good coffee, it's fair trade and it's hopefully organic.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, right, is like all of this is learned behavior or learned perceptions. And I think coming into this industry as somebody who started drinking wine for pleasure only a couple of, like, not too long ago, if you come into it, there's this massive black box of like what you should be caring about. And there's this massive black box, and we see the same thing in specialty coffee where there's an insider community that is basically defining the standards of what is good quality product. And of course, certain aspects of that is taste and is personal, but I think there is sort of this education of the consumer that is ongoing. And so maybe in those instances, we need to be patient in terms of having generational changes of the way that we do things and the way that we see good things happen. And in a way, right, that, as you said we were talking about earlier, that defines not just the way that we produce certain products, but entire lifestyle changes as we move into in the Anthropocene, like an age like defined by man and defined where we're having all of these impacts that we didn't need to be thinking about in the past at that scale. Whenever we think that something is just common sense because that's the way that it's always been done, most of the time if you look back, that's not the case. Like, it hasn't been done for that long, and just because it's the only way that we imagine doing things or that we've learned from the people that we learn from doesn't mean that we can't move forward into different ways of considering value, for instance.
I think there have been a lot of ideas in there. We didn't come in expecting to kind of, solve the world's problems today, but hopefully it sparked some useful kind of thought and debate and so on. And it's been great to see you all here. Hopefully we'll see you upstairs to stay for a little nibble. I'd like to very much thank the panel for joining us. So Steve, DrJanina, I've got that right? Yes, there's the one. Bronwen and Sergio, thanks a lot for your contributions today. It's been great. So, thank you.